Greetings, Frederick Riddle here with another episode of Christian News and Views. This is episode 2609, and this is Thursday Bible Talk. Well, this is part 6 of Foolish Questions. And so I plan on going in and doing other studies next week, but I thought this one here needed to be addressed. Uh, I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm going to read this article and I'm going to, as I read it, I'm going to make a comment, but you'll know when I'm making a comment. So the following question and article has the author's name, but I will not use it because one, I don't personally know him, and two, I don't really want to embarrass him. Well, he may deserve it. So here goes. Was Jesus illiterate? That's the title. That's his title for his article. Was Jesus Christ, the alleged creator of the universe and alleged all-knowing God, illiterate? How very embarrassing. The fact that Jesus didn't leave anything that he wrote himself creates 4 very embarrassing options for Christian apologists as I see them. Number 1, Jesus was illiterate. How very embarrassing. How can an all-knowing, all-wise, omniscient God not know how to read and write? Now, here's my comment on that part. This is the height of high-minded thinking, but lacking in common sense criticism coming from unbelievers. The only time God ever wrote something down was the first chapter of Genesis and the 10 Commandments. God chose men to write the Bible. He spoke and they wrote. It has nothing to do with whether he's literate or not. Obviously, you could say it has everything to do with it too, because the first chapter of Genesis, well, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of commentators believe that that was written by God himself. It's got his signature on it. So that's a whole chapter. And on top of that, you have the 10 Commandments. So God knew how to write. He knows, he gave man the ability to write. And so this is such a stupid suggestion, but I'm going at it because this is another example of how people try to undermine the authority of the scriptures. So first they question Jesus, and then by that, because he also claims to be the God, the Son of God, they are questioning the whole thing about God. So let's move on. Question number 2. Jesus wrote something, but an all-powerful God who wants everyone to believe in Jesus was unable to preserve anything Jesus wrote, leaving us only with error-filled, contradictory human scribblings in the Bible, not to mention a number of outright forgeries, half the epistles of Paul and all the epistles of Peter, James, and John. How very embarrassing. That's the second option. Here's my comment. Embarrassing for who? For you, for the critics. The only thing error-filled was the entire argument that this writer made. As long as we have the King James Bible, we will have an error-free, complimentary record not only of his words, but his actions. These critics have a real problem. They put their faith in a science that is flawed from its inception and is constantly changing to accommodate new discoveries. The Bible still stands as the only reliable historical record of mankind. I have shown here on this very podcast one very famous one about the Hittites, in which science proved that the Bible was error filled because it talked about Hittites and they knew that there was no such group known as the Hittites. They knew this for hundreds of years until the 19th century when they suddenly discovered that, oh, yeah, they did exist. Did they apologize? I don't come up with any kind of an apology that I've ever seen. And they just continue that kind of reasoning. They will declare something to be true, And then when it's found out not to be true, um, they don't apologize. They don't. They just adjust. They adjust their theories and so forth. There have been just in the past year, a couple of years for sure, but I think it's been even just from the beginning of this year. There have been discoveries made that all of a sudden put the revolutionary theory on end. So there's going to be some changes that probably already have been. And to accommodate this new truth. But creationism, which is based on the Bible, doesn't have to change because creationism attributes everything to God. And so anything that happens along the way falls into that scenario, if you will. So it's just so foolish for people to make these outright claims. And not only that, he wrote the article. And I've already talked about how the King James Version is error-free. I've shown this on multiple occasions. And I've even traced out the history of it. And so we know that the King James Version Bible is error-free. We also know that the other versions are not error-free. And that's because the King James Version goes all the way back to, I believe it was Antioch, where that was a commercial center. And so that was where the original New Testament was formed. Now, these New Testament epistles and the Gospels were all letters written to real people, or in some cases, written to local churches. And they were disseminated. We say that so quickly, and we assume that something took place just like that. No, they did not have internet. They did not have TV, radio. They did not have printing presses. They did everything by hand. And what about mailing? We have airplanes that fly, do nothing more than transport media. Could be newsletters, could be newspapers, it could be mail. So I'm focusing on the mail aspect here. They fly it in, it gets unloaded onto a truck, goes to a place where it's processed, gets on another truck and goes out. So again, it can take only a few days, sometimes a week. Back then, it took a whole lot longer for things to travel. And so it took a long time. And some of their arguments don't even take that into consideration. They say they do, but they obviously don't. Back to the article, option number 3. Jesus was not God or the Son of God, but a Jewish rabbi so obscure that no one living during his lifetime wrote a single word about him. How very embarrassing. My comment. The writer keeps embarrassing himself. Just in the New Testament itself, we have contemporaries of Jesus who wrote about him and the church. Here it is. We're talking about the Gospels. Matthew, an apostle who personally knew Jesus. His letter, written around AD 58 to 68, became known as the Gospel according to Matthew. Mark, a disciple and associate of the apostle Peter, wrote the Gospel according to Mark, was written AD 67 or 68. Luke, he was a personal physician to the apostle Paul and a disciple. The Gospel according to Luke was written between AD 58 and 68. John, or we know him as John the Apostle, but they were all. But anyhow, he was an apostle. The Gospel according to John was written about AD 90. Considering that these letters were written to individuals or to specific churches, plus the fact that they did not have typewriters, fax machines, or the internet, these are reasonable time frames and were written within the lifetimes of these men. Furthermore, neither these or the epistles were forgeries. We know these are true and reliable, error-free books. Any changes or charges to the contrary are outright lies based on the fact that the liars didn't want to admit that God was the true author of all of it. The fact is that the these epistles, I've gone through that too, how these things were not only written down originally, but preserved. They used the Old Testament version method, which is called the Masoret way of doing things, and they would go through and they would edit. Now I'm an editor, and I think I do a fairly decent job, but I don't do anything like they did. Their whole focus was on, they would look at individual letters, not letters as in you wrote a letter to somebody. No, individual letters in a word, and they would look at them, and it had to be exactly right. If they made a mistake, they didn't use whiteout and then go back over. No, they threw it away and started all over. They're very, very careful about that. It is the only way that they did it from Antioch and forward, whereas the other versions trace their way back to Alexandria, Egypt, which had error in it from the very beginning. And there's no evidence that they did anything as far as checking for errors and stuff like that. Option number 4, Jesus was always a myth, and of course, myths don't write anything. This is the way I'm leaning. How very embarrassing. Again, this is my comment. As shown in the writer's conclusion, the writer approaches the entire subject with a bias against God. He either makes stuff up or he'll be relying on discredited sources. Now, here's his conclusion. In conclusion, it makes no sense that an all-knowing, all-wise, omniscient God or Son of God was illiterate. How can the creator of the universe be illiterate? But it also makes no sense that an all-powerful God couldn't preserve anything that Jesus wrote if he wanted everyone to believe in Jesus. Thus, we are left with the other two options, which make the Christian religion a bunch of superstitious malarkey. There you have his own, this is my comment again, his own confession of unbelief, which discredits him and his opinion. The truth is that the Gospels were written or backed by apostolic authority and were based on the life of Christ, a life of Christ that they personally knew about. Either they, or in case of Mark and Luke, they were associated with men who did know Christ. Paul, in his sense, he was after the resurrection. He spent about 3 to 3.5 years in the desert of Arabia. The Bible calls it the wilderness. We believe that there's evidence that he spent that time with Jesus. So, like the other apostles, he had 3.5 years with him. The amazing thing is that all evidence points to them having written their Gospels independently of one another. While it is possible they knew of the other Gospels, it is not plausible simply because the circulation of letters were extremely slow. And here I might mention walking, mules and horses and ships. Sail ships, mind you, not your steamships. Altogether, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written within 35 years of the crucifixion. And no, Matthew didn't copy Mark. Like Mark, Matthew was inspired by the Holy Spirit. And so there's much more that I could say on this subject, but I'm going to leave it at that point right there, because if you've been a Christian for any length of time, you already know much of what I've just told you. If you're a new Christian, you need to stick with the King James Version, first of all, and trust it. It is a proven book. When you look at the history of Christianity from the time of the crucifixion to here, or actually to 1611 for that matter, first of all, there are a lot of people got saved during that time. How did they get saved? Did they get saved based on these false versions? It's possible. I could take those false versions and lead somebody to the Lord. But it's more likely that they had copies which were based on the Textus Receptus. And they mean it depends upon, in some cases, there was political influences and things of this nature, but from what I've been able to study and find out, these earlier versions were accurate. Whether we could say they were 100% accurate, free or error free, I'm not sure about. But they had, doctrinally speaking, they were much on very solid ground. When the King James Version came on the scene, King James himself was something of a scholar, although he had nothing to do with the writing of the King James Version other than he authorized it. Then came the people who he was also probably involved in the selection of the translators. These were quite a few men, and these were men, I believe I did a study on them at one time in the past, highly educated. Some of them could speak Koine Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in, and is now considered a dead language. They could read it, they could write it, they could speak it fluently. And they did this as teenagers. Now, I'm not saying they all did this, but at least some of them did. And I think all of them knew Koine Greek. And they could at least read it and maybe even write it. They were experts. The experts today that exist today have a great deal of knowledge, but the Koine Greek is not among them. They know classical Greek. And so they use their knowledge of classical Greek to interpret Koine Greek. Well, that's a very, you might say, a very shifting landscape there. So the knowledge of modern translators, modern experts, doesn't measure up to the knowledge of the translators of the Textus Receptus into the King James Version. And so it comes down to trusting God, not trusting man. God's the one who selected these guys. God's the one who saw to their early training and preparation. And by the way, these were not people who just in their spare time did this stuff. They literally, some of them were professors, and they took leave of their professorate, however you are say that. But they had a position. They took leave of that position and would spend a year or two working just on what they would have had different assignments as to what they could work on. And they focused on that day in and day out. And so they were actually able to not only spend time, but they gave their expertise, their understanding. They studied it. They were into the translation work day and night, every day, for as long as it would take. So the charges made against King James Version have been well proven to be false. And people who don't believe that are being deceived. Does that mean they're not saved? No, it does not. It means they're being deceived. They may be very intelligent. Intelligent people can be deceived. I'm not one of those intelligent people, but I can be deceived. So can you. We're human beings. And if you're a human being, you can be deceived. It's part of our makeup, especially ever since Adam sinned. Our sin nature makes it easy for us to be deceived. But the fact is, we can rely on the King James Version Bible. And so when these people come around and they invent their little stories and invent their, and they like to use these words, we know. Well, I could say that too, and I have evidence to back up. They don't have any evidence. when you look at their evidence that they supposedly have, it falls apart. It's based on lies, innuendos, and most of the stuff that they charge against the King James Version, it's almost like this. If you got one finger pointing here, you got three pointing back at yourself. When they point a finger at King James, it turns out to be that finger is wrong. They've got three fingers pointing back at themselves, and that's correct because the very things they assign to us to the King James is their newer versions, which aren't new at all, but their newer versions are also, they are definitely flawed. So I'm going to leave that there. So if you're a Christian and you don't believe in the King James Version Bible, and you follow this anyhow, I just invite you to check out the facts. Don't assume that everything they say is correct. And remember this, when even Strong's Concordance, it goes in and gives the Greek. That's based on classical Greek, folks. Koine Greek is a dead language. There may be one or two, a handful of people in this world who still know Koine Greek. I don't know who they are, if they do exist. But it is considered, that's not my terminology. Other experts have said it's a dead language. And when they call a language dead, that means that even the ability to read it is virtually gone. And so that's something that people of higher intellect than I am are saying. But I'm just taking their word for it because I can't read Greek, classical, or Koine. But anyhow, you have a great day. I do want to remind you that I try to always inform you, encourage you, and inspire you. I also want to let you know that TNR Independent Books, a Christian indie publisher, is the sponsor of this podcast. TNR Independent Books wants to be a promoter of you, wants to help you to become a Christian published author. If you don't know how to write, but you feel you've been called to write, then we have a basic authors training writing course. Go to trbookservices.com, go to our store, and there in the writing department, you will find basic authors training, different ways you can get it. You simply apply, and I will see it. If I approve it, I'll send you back a congratulations letter, and I'll provide you with links as to however you want to pay for it. And there's a coupon of significant value that will be associated with it. Same thing is true of ministry publishing. You know how to write, but you need a publisher. We want you to consider us. Again, apply, fill out that form and send it in. I will look at it. If I approve, I will send you that same letter, and this time not as a student, but as a client, and send you links and that same voucher of I believe it's considerable, significant anyhow, value. And you'll be pleasantly surprised. Well, that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.